My father had just died. Part of me wanted to be happy that he was with Mom again, but I just couldn't forgive him for drinking himself to death after she had drowned. It felt as though he'd abandoned me. I had to drive back to South Carolina all alone, no music playing on the radio, just staring at the open road in silence, drowning in thoughts. The funeral was about as somber as I'd expected. My childhood church had not changed in the least bit, and those Southern Baptists were just judgmental as ever. Although not very many people showed up, and after the divorce took away my manhood and my money, I could only afford to keep his ashes in a little cardboard shoebox. It featured nothing other than what amounted to a tiny price tag that said his name, Thaddeus Ray Sr. It felt a bit bittersweet to drive through those thick, hot woods I used to frolic through as a kid. The moonlight put on a play for me of flickering memories between the trees, and I remembered hunting in them with Papa, fishing in the gigantic lake near our little cabin, playing around in the creek. But all that felt like a lifetime ago. I didn't have any friends growing up. My classmates all thought I was weird because I stayed to myself drawing goofy characters and writing stories about them, and we lived in the boonies with our only neighbors being furry woodland creatures. You'd think I would have been used to being lonely. Walking into that house was like walking into a dream. The very air reeked of cheap beer and body odor and some sort of decay that I really wanted to ignore. Empty bottles and crushed cans were scattered everywhere, cobwebs aligned the corners of each room, and absolutely everything was covered in dust. But his recliner, still facing that old box TV, was perfectly clean. Even though it was surrounded by bottles and cans, it looked as if he'd just gotten up from it to grab another beer. And in that moment I realized that it was I that had abandoned him. Everything he and Mama ever owned was now mine. This little house in the woods, despite its many, many differences, reminded me so much of my tiny little cramped apartment back in Atlanta, Georgia. It was just a few miles from the nice house I'd bought for my ex-wife and I to grow old within, but it was filled with a dark, stagnant energy, just like that awful cabin. Since I'd ran away as a teenager, all of my dreams had taken place in this house, my childhood home, and most of the time they quickly devolved into nightmares, involving that dark, deep lake in the woods, and my mother. I put the shoebox of his ashes up on the mantel, below that massive deer buck head and above the rustic fireplace, and then I just stood there, hearing the ticking of the clock on the wall, silently staring into nothingness. It hurt to breathe. I felt like a bomb about to explode. All I wanted to do was scream, but instead I started cleaning, just like my mother when she quietly washed dishes after every time my father smacked the shit out of her. After I spent a few hours of going through my pa's things, it started. Seemingly agonized snarls and howls were erupting from the depths of the woods, and it was like no animal I had ever heard of. As I approached the front door, my mind offered up explanations and repeatedly struck them down. Deer? No. Coyote? No. Bear? No. Raccoon? No. Actually, the more I listened, the more human it sounded, and soon goosebumps were covering my whole body. Whatever it was clear that it was in pain. A lot of pain. I thought of how my parents taught me to nurse abandoned kittens and fallen baby birds back to health. If they were still around, they would have wanted me to help this animal in need. The cricket's song roared louder as I opened the screen door. Lightning bugs guided my path through the overgrown grass of the yard and into the trees that surrounded the little wooden cabin. Into the darkening depths I went, following the pained sounds of the creature beneath the pillars of soft moonlight as they rained down through the canopy of trees above. It wasn't long before I began to recognize the path I was taking. Soon I arrived at the creek I swam in and played in as a child, or what remained of it. It was now a small sliver of water at the bottom of a vast crevice. Large moss-covered roots ran from one of its wet, muddy walls to the other, creating little bridges, and between them, far below me within the gully, though my sudden appearance had silenced it, was the mysterious creature. The full moon did little to help me decipher what manner of beast it was, but the way it shimmered in the light, I could tell that it was wet with mud, as if it had been struggling to get out of that wretched ravine. Its round, shimmering eyes were focused on me, studying me, growing more cautious with each passing second. "It's all right, little one," I softly cooed, stepping toward the edge. "I just want to help you." I then approached one of the massive roots that trailed through the gully, watching it slowly back itself up against the muddy wall behind it. "I'm not gonna hurt you, little guy. I'm a gentle soul." Carefully climbing down the mossy log, I began to notice the creature's appendages. Horns? No, spikes. It had a set of mohawk-shaped spikes going right down the middle of its head, which was surprisingly humanoid, with pointed ears on the sides. Looking down, I saw what appeared to be a tail like that of a fish, ending in spiky, flared-out fins. I could barely make out a muscular human torso and arms, but altogether the creature was all little more than a silhouette. I froze in place at the end of that log, a few feet away from the being. Losing myself in the moonlight or fighting in its eyes, I couldn't decide whether or not to believe my own. Was I hallucinating? Had I fallen asleep, making this a dream? With a violent kick of its tail, the creature answered my question. Its fins splashed mud all across my face and chest, and it roared at me in warning. Terrified, I reacted by instinctively backing away from it, forgetting I was on the edge of a wet, large, mossy log, and of course that sent me falling into the gully and splashing into the deep, thick mud right in front of the creature. A weird silence spread throughout the woods at that point, and I was too afraid to move. Wiping the mud from my face with a shaking hand, I noticed the creature mirroring my movements before me. My fall had splashed some mud onto it as well. Seeing this, I couldn't help but chuckle, and much to my shock, the creature seemed to laugh as well, the moonlight shimmering across its sharp teeth, within a smile. Suddenly, it sounded a lot more human. Its voice, masculine and deep, sounded a bit like some of my old drinking buddies at the bar after someone told an offensive joke. But after that, all was quiet again. "I'm only here to help, little feller," I whispered, slowly standing up. Reaching my hand down toward it, I grew nervous. "You clearly ain't a mud skipper. Let's get you out of here and back into some water, alright?" As I approached, the creature gazed up at me through those round, frightened eyes, and within a few moments, it raised a human-like hand to meet my own, and when I took it, I discovered that its fingers were webbed. I was able to lift him into my arms, with his own around my neck. Slowly and carefully, I climbed back onto that old mossy log and did my best to balance. The bottoms of my old beat-up tennis shoes were a slip-sliding every which way, but I persevered. Cradling that critter like a baby, I could feel the tiny glimmering scales all over his body. He kept his concerned eyes locked onto me as I trudged back through those hot, shadowy woods. Looking around the trees and the leafy forest floor, I couldn't decipher which way led to the lake. I was exhausted, and I knew my new friend was probably hurt and hungry, so I slowly carried him back to my pa's house. I laid him down in Mama's old, massive garden tub and showered the mud off of him. And much to my surprise, he was exactly what I thought he was, a beautiful silver-skinned merman. He had fin spikes where his facial hair would have been, and darker scales on his muscular chest and abs that looked similar to body hair. After running the mud and sticks and leaves down the drain, I began to fill the tub with water. He seemed to prefer a temperature that was just under lukewarm, and almost immediately he went under the surface, and little gills in the side of his neck began to flap. As he did so, I noticed some air bubbles coming out from his humanoid nostrils, showing me that he had both gills and lungs. Well, I began, sitting down on the closed toilet seat. Pulling off my green John Deere hat, I scratched the back of my head through my damp, sweaty hair. "You ain't hurt, are you?" He stared up at me with those big glimmering eyes, slowly blinking. He arched his brows. "Looks like you were just dehydrated, so say, what do, creatures like you eat, anyhow?" The merman blinked in confusion, tilting his head as I pretended to eat something from my hand, miming the action of biting and chewing. Seeing this, he smiled, revealing mostly human teeth, except for his canines, which were incredibly long and sharp. The molars beside them were almost just as much. This made me realize that he was probably omnivorous, like humans, and I got an idea. In Papa's freezer, all I found was a box of frozen fried fish sticks. That was Papa's favorite for some reason, though I was never a big fan. Mama was never too keen on them either, from what I remember. Nevertheless, I nuked them in the microwave and shared them with my new buddy. Honestly, part of me kind of expected to hate them, like maybe one of them was one of his fishy friends or something, but no, he absolutely loved them. Ate more than I did. Even licked the crumbs off the paper plate and started looking for more. "Nah, little feller, that's all the fish sticks," I said, gazing down at him, playing in the water with my fingertips. "Now get some sleep now, you hear? Tomorrow I'm taking you out on Papa's old boat and dropping you off back in the lake. How's that sound?" In silence, he gently reached over and touched my hand with his own. Gazing into my eyes, he pulled me closer toward the tub and began to wash the dried, flaky mud from my red and black button-up flannel shirt. When he realized it wasn't actually connected to my body, his brows furrowed, and he slowly, curiously started to unbutton. Bless your heart. I can wash my clothes. Papa had one of them fancy dual machines put in, I said, standing back up. I continued undressing down to my boxer briefs, but this just seemed to confuse him even more. He looked from me to the pile of clothes on the floor, a look of complete bewilderment on his handsome face. I laughed a bit, finding him increasingly adorable with every situation. I am kind of grimy, though, I said, stepping back toward the tub. You mind sharing your bath? As if he understood what I was asking, he reached out to my hand once more. He then took a hold of it with his wet fingers and gently pulled me into the tub. I stepped over the porcelain wall and placed my feet on either side of his thick, muscular tail, smiling down at him. Once I was there, however, he quickly ripped away my boxer briefs with a strength that I had not expected. My manhood flopped about for a split second before I desperately tried to cover it with my hands. I then tried to grab my ripped underwear back from the creature, only to have him hide it behind him under the water. Before I knew it, we were wrestling for dominance, water splashing out onto the bathroom floor tile. The house filled with laughter. For the first time since I was a child, and suddenly he was on top of me, tossing the soaked, shredded underpants toward the door. Time seemed to freeze as I gazed into his sparkling eyes, memorizing his beautiful face. I was breathless and felt like I was living in a fairy tale, and all I wanted was for him to kiss me. Instead, the creature softly chuckled and nestled into the water beside me. Resting his head onto my chest, he closed his eyes and softly breathed. His fins seemed to wrap around my feet, and I could feel his fingertips softly caressing my hairy chest. He smelled just like water, fresh rain from the summer storms, like the wind on the lake, like the healing waters of a wishing well, and my heart swelled with emotions that I hadn't felt in a decade as I gently cradled him in my arms. The last time I held someone like this, it was Abigail on our wedding night. We had just finished making love for the first time and had completely worn each other out. Spent and sweating, we caught our breath, feeling each other's heartbeat, and slowly fell asleep. A stark contrast to our last conversation. She called me disgusting through the locked door of our house. The most hurtful thing she'd said to me was that she was relieved she wasn't pregnant because she would have aborted it just because it would have been mine, when all I did was open up and share with her the true me, the real me. Praying that I wouldn't wake up only to realize this was all a dream, my tired eyes fluttered to a close. Knowing this night would be the first night in years that wasn't plagued by nightmares, I smiled, and he and I fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms in that cold bath water within my mom's old garden tub. It came to me in a dream. The name Lachlan was perfect for him. It honored my family's Scotch-Irish heritage and had the meaning of land of the lakes. We woke up the next afternoon at the same time. The orange sunlight poured in from the large window to my right, shimmering across his sparkling, beautiful body. Before I knew it, I was kissing his forehead and caressing his cheek with my fingertips. "Good morning, Lachlan," I whispered. "Did you sleep okay?" He blinked those big eyes and tilted his head. He then kissed my cheek and smiled, causing me to blush a bit. "I guess you like the name then," I stated, sitting up in the tub. "Mine is Thaddeus. Usually people learn each other's names before they sleep together, or get naked together, or take a bath together, but you know." As I climbed out of the large tub, dripping the now lukewarm water, I heard him trying to speak behind me. At first, I just thought he was making noise. Grabbing a towel, I began to dry myself off, thinking about how I was going to get him back to the lake. "Thad?" he managed from the tub. He then splashed me with his fins. "Thad!" Chills ran down me as I froze in place. Turning back to him, I furrowed my brows in confusion. Yeah? I questioned, studying him. He bit his lower lip and began trying to make the F sound by blowing through those big buck teeth. Soon he was saying "fish sticks" repeatedly, splashing excitedly in the water. I laughed boisterously and nodded. "Yeah, I'm pretty hungry too, Lachlan," I stated, finally fully drying myself off. "But I ain't got no more food, and I don't want to leave you alone here while I make a trip to the store. We're gonna have to find some fish in the lake if we want to eat today." Luckily, my pa's old fishing boat was still in great condition. I remembered him taking me out on the lake with it to fish. He was always much better at it than I was. After getting dressed, I went out to the garage next to the house where Papa kept all of his fishing supplies. It was there that I found spears and what looked like a small handheld harpoon gun that could be used underwater. Ignoring this, I gathered our old fishing poles in his huge tackle box. I then loaded the boat up with the fishing supplies, wrapping Lachlan up in a wet towel and sitting him up in the passenger seat of my truck. I then hitched the boat to it and we set off driving through those endless woods. Lachlan was a bit concerned about the large human machinery he'd been locked within, but the southern rock playing on the radio and my singing along with it seemed to cheer him up immensely. Soon he was dancing in his seat along with me. My taste in music was a gift from my mother. Papa only ever liked country and bluegrass and folk and banjos this and fiddles that and blah blah blah. But Mama was a rocker chick through and through. I hadn't danced and sang in the car like that since she was alive, and it felt as if she were up there somewhere, smiling down on both of us, rocking out. Suddenly, Lachlan reached over and snatched my hat from my head. He studied it for a moment or two, but when I said he should try it on, he seemingly understood and did just that. Unfortunately, those spiky mohawk-like fins on his head stabbed right through the fabric, ripping it in two. His brows arched, and his full moon eyes shot over to me in fear. I chuckled. "It's okay, babe," I said, taking it from him. "I have a ton of them." At one point, I reached back into the back seat and opened my cooler. The ice was melted, but my bottled waters were still cold. I retrieved one and unscrewed the cap, letting it fly off into the shadows of my truck, and took a sip. Lachlan was intrigued. I handed the bottle to him and told him what it was, and again he seemed to comprehend my words. Holding it up to his plump, kissable lips, he drank. A wide grin spread across his handsome face, and he proceeded to rip away the damp towel and pour the remains of the water bottle over his tail. It poured off and dripped into the floorboard below as I laughed and shook my head. Just then, as I changed gears in the truck, he reached over and touched my hand with his own as it rested over the gear shift. Smiling over at him, I held his slick, pale hand like I once did with Abigail, softly, lovingly rubbing my thumb on the back of it. Soon he drew closer to me, leaning against the middle console and resting his head on my shoulder. Again I lost my breath at his touch. I quietly turned the radio off so that he could rest. As I went to kiss his forehead again, however, he lifted his head up and pressed his lips against my own. This frightened me so much that I almost ran us off the old dirt road. We almost hit a massive oak tree, but thankfully I course-corrected right in the nick of time. After that, Lachlan simply stared out of the window. He watched the birds, gazed upon the pillars of light raining down from the forest canopy above, and watched the winding creeks as they spiraled throughout the woods around us. Seeing him leaning against the car door, I made sure to activate the lock on it so that it wouldn't open. By sunset, we made it to the lake, and luckily it was far too hot for anyone to be out on it. Lachlan had become pretty dehydrated and was desperate for water. I lifted him up from the passenger seat, and he kissed my cheek. Smiling through the tears, I walked him down to the shore, dreading my inevitable return to the dark silence of that house. I felt as if I were on the first hill of a roller coaster. My vision slowly faded to black as dark memories of my father screaming at me and beating me flooded through my mind. Hearing his gravelly voice as he hurled homophobic insults at me, I felt as if I were screaming on the inside. But as I stepped into the cool waters of the lake, these dark visions were replaced by him hugging me and telling me how proud he was of me on my wedding day. He followed that up by getting drunk and grabbing my new bride's ass before the reception even started. Thankfully, Mama died before she had to see that. Lachlan, roughly leaping from my arms and diving into the water, snapped me back into reality. I had walked into the lake up to my waist without realizing it, and his dive splashed cold water onto my face. The wet, unwrapped towel laid strewn across my arms as my empty hands reached aimlessly into the dark depths before me. The lake glimmered beneath the setting sun and the cotton candy sky. They met in the distance, both of their blue hues mixing together and fading into one another perfectly. The islands in the distance and the land on the other side were a brilliant green because of the thick, verdant forests that were spread over every inch of them. It was eerily calm. The only sounds were that of the water softly splashing upon the shore. It scared me at first, him trying to take off my clothes from beneath the surface. When I realized what he was doing, however, I began to take my shirt off. He yanked off my shoes and socks and pulled off my camouflage jeans, followed by my boxer briefs. Finally, I threw my baseball cap off into the distance just as his mohawked head poked out from the water before me. In that moment, he spat water in my face and laughed. Seeing my reaction, he turned around and dove back into the water, swimming away. Chuckling, I swam after him. We played like children in the deepest depths of the lake, and I felt perfectly safe with him. The sun set over us as we pulled ourselves up onto an island among honeysuckles and muscadines. There we began to feed one another the berries and juices from the little flowers. Soon he pressed his lips against my own and surprisingly parted them. Our tongues caressed one another as he climbed on top of me. My legs instinctively wrapped around him, and we made love beneath the moonlight and through the night. I awoke the next day naked and all alone in the calming rains. He was gone. I gave him all of me, and he abandoned me in the fog. Not wanting to sleep alone in that cabin, I went back to the shore, got dressed, gathered up my strength, and pulled the boat out onto the lake. After setting myself up, I started fishing for the first time since I was little, and as the moonlight flickered across the water, I swear I could hear the lullaby my mother sang to me as a baby echoing through the foggy air itself. They ruled her death an accident. She and Papa were fighting about me, and he hit her again, but he said he watched her walk out into the lake, calling out to her, and her only response to him was a solemn, "Just let me go." That didn't sound like an accident to me. In my heart, it felt like she was finally leaving him, in the only way she knew how. The fish just weren't biting. Maybe Lachlan had scared them all away. Was he still there? Remembering Papa sometimes hid snacks like beef jerky or cheese sticks in that big old tackle box, I turned around and started fiddling with it again. Opened it up once more. I noticed something lying on the bottom, just beneath the little boxes of bait. It was a notebook. Inside of it were scribbles, the ramblings of a drunken madman surrounded by beer stains. They went from blaming himself for Mama's death to talking about how he was going to be thrown into Broughton, a mental hospital up in North Carolina that some of his family died in. It sounded as if he were afraid of people thinking he was crazy, and on the very last page was a crude drawing of a merman with the words "he took her" scribbled repeatedly below it. I sat there in that boat as it slowly drifted on the surface of the lake, just staring down at that picture for what felt like hours. The fog grew thicker around me as I drowned within my anxious thoughts, and I just didn't know how to feel. As soon as I awoke in my childhood bed the next day, I was drinking the rest of Papa's beer. It was storming. Before I knew it, I was buying more. I didn't eat, I just drank and drank and drank. And I don't know how long I was drunk, but I couldn't remember the last time I was sober. One night, about a month later, I was drunk and wandering around the woods. I ended up stumbling and falling at the creek where I'd first met Lachlan. It had filled up again, and it was quite a ways over my head. I was so full of alcohol that my whole body felt numb. Still and silent, I just floated there in the water, arms and legs stretched wide at my sides. And it was then that I saw him swim before me in a pillar of sparkling moonlight. At first, I thought he was trying to drown me like Papa thought he did Mama. I fought him as he tried to take a hold of me and pull me toward the surface. Thankfully, he bound my hands to my sides and threw me back up between the trees, and as soon as I landed, I vomited onto the grass below. Weakly turning back to him, I saw just how confused and hurt he looked. For some reason, this pissed me off. "What, don't want to drown me like you did Mama?" I then threw a rock at him. Thankfully it missed, but it splashed water right into his face. "Fatty?" he managed, shaking his head. He arched his brows as his eyes grew round with heartache, as tears formed within them. His voice was broken and strained, as if he were about to break down crying. Hearing this, the nickname only my mother called me, I began to scream like a madman and continued to throw debris as he dove back underwater, and I watched in silence as he began to swim back upstream toward the lake. I drank even more after that and stayed drunk until September. The house looked even more of a mess than it did when I arrived. All I wanted was Lachlan, and that filled me with guilt and made me miss my mother even more, so I decided to finally start going through her stuff. Seemed like moths had gotten to her wedding dress. The old family photo albums were quite the state of disarray. I assumed Papa had tried to go through them after she had died. Her collection of cookbooks had become even more extensive since I'd run away, but the most important thing I'd found was a locked diary that I didn't even know she had kept. For the life of me, I could not find the key. It seemed as though Papa never did either, as there were scratches on the lock. I actually ended up breaking it open with a screwdriver, and within it I found the truth. Well, little Thaddeus' imaginary friend ain't actually imaginary. I saw them playing together in the creek today, and he is just magical. At first, I was afraid that he may hurt my little boy, but that creature is just as gentle as he is cute. He's careful and considerate of little Thaddy, as if he genuinely cares about him, and I'm certain he wouldn't harm any of us. All I had to make them for supper was some frozen fish sticks, but they actually loved them. Isn't that something? I'm praying that Thaddy and the Merboy remain friends as they grow up. My heart breaks for him, and I won't be here forever. It will be my time to go home to Jesus soon. I just hope I can hold on until my baby is safe. Lachlan didn't drown my mother. She really did take her own life. Papa was just doing what he'd always done, blaming everyone else but himself, and I had ended up chasing away the only real friend I had ever had. Over the next few days, childhood memories of us in that creek washed over me. I had to have been around 4 years old when we met, and he was just as small as I was back then. He smoked just fine, actually. He was just shy. Lachlan really was his name, and he told me an incredible story. He was once a human boy, lived in one of those nice houses on the other side of the lake. They were surrounded by forests, too, and it was there that he met a strange old witch. She saw his black eye and tattered clothes and asked who had done it. He told her it was his drunk of a daddy, and she asked him if he wanted to be free of him. Lachlan did indeed. He told her about how he loved swimming in the lake and the creeks and the woods and wanted to do so for the rest of his life, and so she concocted a little potion for him to drink. Little Lachlan was changed forever, and for a time we were inseparable. We were so close, but Papa's drinking and fighting with me and Mama must have scared him back into the waters, because he stopped coming out to play after things got bad. After that, Papa kept telling me to stop playing pretend, to grow up to be a man, and any time I brought up Lachlan or the sorceress in the woods, he'd whip me with a switch until I bled. Because of that, I must have blocked those sweet memories out of my mind. After remembering all of this, I'd wake up crying in the middle of the night, just wailing into the dark, calling out his name. Every time I woke up, I'd feel sick to my stomach because I remembered what I had done. This must have been how Papa felt about Mama dying and why he had to start blaming somebody else for his mistakes. I too wanted to blame someone else. I wanted to blame Papa. Even in death, he was finding some way to twist my fucking brain and break my fucking heart. And I let him do it. I let him cost me a goddamn fairy tale. And the only thing that made me feel better, just like him, was alcohol. Around that time was when I started waking up in strange places, the bus stop, beneath my damn truck, random places throughout the woods, and finally, I awoke in the misty twilight, drifting out on the lake of the fishing boat, my fishing rod in my grasp. There were so many beer cans all around me that I could have swam in them, and honestly, I'm surprised the boat stayed afloat with just how many they were. Well, this freaked me out so much that I tried to stand up, and of course this rocked the boat, which sent me flying over the side of it, and suddenly I found myself sinking into an endless darkness yet again. Voices of my loved ones echoed through my mind. I heard my mother begging me to come home. This was followed by my father calling me an abomination, telling me that God hated me. Abigail telling me that her intimate memories of us made her want to vomit. Finally, Lachlan calling me fatty, with that sad, broken voice, and part of me began to think, after all this, maybe I really deserved to die. Before I knew it, I was pulled back up to the surface and dragged onto the shore. I found myself interchangeably coughing up water and gasping for breath, and as I opened my eyes and my lungs calmed down, my gaze met that of Lachlan. Before I even had time to speak, he met his lips to mine, and much to my surprise, he parted them, and a gentle, curious tongue began to caress my own. We wrapped our arms around each other and rolled about on the shore, making out like horny teenagers, my legs wrapped around his muscular tail. Finally, he broke our kiss and spoke in perfect English. "You remember me now?" I nodded. "You came back." Happy tears filled my eyes as I held him tightly. "You're real, and you came back." I kissed him again and again. I just couldn't get enough. "Would you be my boyfriend?" His brows raised in surprise, but his smile faded. "Of course I came back," he replied, shaking his head. "Did you think I'd abandoned you? I only left because there were people riding boats out on the lake, and the witch told me no matter what, I could not let anyone see me." Arching my brows, I tilted my head. "But you let me see you." He took a breath. "That's because I love you. I always have." I sniffled. "I love you too." He scoffed. "But you gotta stop drinking." I nodded furiously. Yes, 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 I repeated, still feeling drunk from the night before. "I'm done, I promise. I'll dump every drop in the lake." Lachlan's face scrunched up in disgust. "Really? In my lake?" Awkwardly laughing, I shook my head. "No, down the toilet then," I stated, taking his hand into my own and gazing into his eyes. "I promise, Lachlan, I will never drink again." He smiled once again, instantly relieving me. "You know your father really scared me when we were kids," he said, resting next to me. Placing his hand onto my chest, he listened to my heartbeat. "And watching you turn into him was just, well, it was breaking my heart, Daddy." I gently cradled him like I did in the bathtub. Tears filled my eyes as I realized I had truly fallen in love for the first time. "I'm sorry, sweet thing. You're my fairy tale." Smiling, he looked back up at me. "I think you're mine too." We shared another passionate kiss, and I realized I'd never been so attracted, so aroused by someone in my entire life. Of course, my type had to be a mythological creature. "You know," I said, breaking our kiss, "I'd really like to meet this witch in the woods." He chuckled. "Oh, you will. I told her all about you. She's like a second mama to me, and she says you gotta get her approval before we can be together." I chortled at this and hopped onto my feet. At the same time, I lifted him up into my arms, cradling him once more. It'll take more than an old witch to keep me from you," I exclaimed, planting more kisses onto his delicious lips. "You got some werewolves that want to fight me?" He laughed boisterously like the jovial child I remembered. "You'd be surprised. There's lots of magic in these woods, you know. We usually just keep quiet. But I just couldn't do that with you. That day, as I was hiding under the water among the crawdads and the water moccasins, I saw you playing in the creek, and I just knew I had to meet you." I gazed into his beautiful, otherworldly eyes, and "I thank God you did," I cooed, just before tasting him once more. My beloved then let out a sigh and turned back to the massive lake, looking at the boat which was now upside down and aimlessly drifting through the water. Letting out a sigh of defeat, he turned back to me. "You kinda suck at fishing, by the way, especially when you're drunk." The sparkling fins were swirling and twirling behind him as he grinned, showing those sharp white canines. So, fish sticks for lunch?